The foreign debt obligations of the country have compelled us to set aside by automatic appropriation practically 1/3 of our annual national budget. This has led to a substantial reduction in the appropriations for education, health, infrastructure, and other basic services, which in turn hamper the development and progress of the country and prejudice the well-being of the people. What specific proposals do you have to address this situation?
We were informed that the current government is not necessarily transparent about the debt situation because they have not included also in their counting the corporate debt of national government corporations. It's out of books, but that's a related issue there. No? But assuming we were going to include that as well, no? The government corporate debt, which is large, no? Such as Nat'l. We want the government to be transparent in how the debts are being paid, exactly what amounts and to what particular purpose or creditor is the debt being paid. Why is that so? Because for most of you, you were not yet born yet when the government had planned the nuclear power plant, which was paid. Eventually, it cost twice the actual cost that it was supposed to be, and there was even a case there. Unfortunately, the Philippine government lost in that case, so we're faced with the reality of payment. Given that reality, perhaps the government should look into setting aside a lower amount or percentage for debt servicing. Why is that so? Because the appropriations for education, health, infrastructure, and other basic services are equally important. What's happening now is we're sacrificing the very survival of the Filipino people at the expense of making the creditors happy. So the Congress should, if necessary, pass legislation to define the parameters that will mandate the executive department in restructuring, in renegotiating the debt, such that we set aside a lower portion or a lower percentage than the 1/3 that is practically set aside. The other one is the automatic appropriation, the Presidential Decree 1177, if I have that number correctly, is still part of the statutes of the land put out by President Marcos. Why? Why is this an important decree? Because remember, even if you have a line budget item or a budget that specifies the purpose in which it will be used, that presidential decree authorizes any president, any sitting president, to set aside any amount that he or she wishes for payment, even if it's not in the line budget item. And this is quite dangerous. I'm surprised those who are running for public office, especially those for re-election, have not even considered repealing, if not amending that particular law. So we need all of your support also, because you have to write your members of Congress so that this will be made possible. Because, you know, if let's say a few of us get elected, if at all, it is the people who determine what legislation comes in. Thank you.
Debt servicing. Our debt is now 1.14 trillion. 2.7 trillion. It's 2.7 trillion. 77 trillion. This is the debt that has been borrowed by Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo during her 5 years in office. And it is 3 times the debt that has been borrowed by 3 administrations of Cory, Ramos, and Estrada, which only totaled to 1.51 trillion. I don't know how you can imagine how trillion looks like. So therefore, we are deeply in debt. We pay 2 billion a day, pesos. A day, can you imagine, for our debt? And can you see the repercussions of this? Some of the debts are bad debts, and some of the debts are really to be paid because they were used properly. So perhaps what we can recommend, if we are elected, is again to look into the debt problem. If we are relieved of it, like we can renegotiate, as somebody mentioned, so that we are relieved maybe of the bad debts, or let those debtors pay for the debts because we were not the ones who benefited from it. That is one way of trying to solve the debt problem. The second is to ask for a relief. So that part of what goes to debt, automatic or whatever, can go now to social services, especially education and health. Why education and health? Because this is where we need to really put our energies so that we can wipe out poverty. In Korea, in Taiwan, in Malaysia, they were able to wipe out poverty in 30 years because they worked on their education and health. We can also do this.
Thank you very much. Dr. Bautista.
I am absolutely for the repeal of the automatic appropriations law because I find this law immoral. Why do I say this? You know, we are the only country on earth with such a law. And this was an imposition imposed upon us in the 1980s when we were struggling to get out of debt once again. So consider these physicians at that time in 1983, Dr. IMF, Dr. World Bank, Dr. ADB. They gave us a prescription, 1983, liberalize trade, devalue the peso, institute the automatic appropriations law. 25 years later, where are we now? We are second to the poorest, to East Timor. We put 1% to healthcare. We put 11% to education. We put 28% to interest payments alone. I find this morally this is totally immoral in my mind. So we really have to make sure that the automatic appropriations law is repealed immediately. Now, why am I so strong against this? The automatic appropriations law hinders us from being able to negotiate effectively with banks. How is it that we go to a bank and we have our hands tied behind our backs because we have this law that tells us that before we even allocate for education and health and infrastructure, we have to set aside a set amount of money to pay for interest payments? Isn't this ridiculous? It also adds to the national inferiority complex that we all have that prevents us from being able to negotiate trade agreements, peace agreements, security agreements, and finally loan agreements. So that for the last 25 years, we've always had the worst deals possible. And you know, it's easier for us to live within our comfort zones and pretend that nothing is really happening. But if you think about it, this is the ultimate human rights abuse. Because of this, because we're unable to put anything on health and infrastructure and education, 75 Filipinos continue to die from tuberculosis each day. This is an eminently treatable disease that could be wiped out if only we placed 2 or 3 billion pesos a year. Something that we pay off, according to my sources, we pay this amount every 2 days anyway. Why can't we put it towards tuberculosis? In other words, let's stop being hypocritical about this. People are dying because of this law. People are dying because of the misplaced priorities of our government. And it's about time for you and me to do something about it. You know, America stopped when 33 people were killed. Do we stop even for a second because 75 Filipinos die from a treatable condition like tuberculosis each day? Nobody cares anymore. Everybody is so numbed about this.
Thank you, Dr. Bautista.